Hey there, art nerds! So we are on day 3 of our Paperchild project, and today we're creating a little watercolor Paperchild who will hold your Christmas lights in her hands. So if you're not familiar with this project, we already have 2 paper children completed. We have our little candy cane thief here, and when she's assembled, she'll be able to hold a sugary sweet. And then we have a twofer here. We have 2 little elves to sit on your shelves. Ooh, tongue twister there. And today we're painting our little light holders. So this Kara, you can slot a light into her hand and then clip her onto your Christmas tree branch. So if you're not familiar with Paper Children, it's basically a way to take your 2-dimensional art and take it into the 3D world. And these are some examples of Paper Children that I created to help promote the Kickstarter for 7-inch Kara Volume 2 back in July. It's now available on my site for pre-order, or you can order Volume 1. I'll link those down in the description below. Kara is part of a race of tiny 7-inch tall people called Lilliputians, and if you're interested in learning more about them, I'll have a link to my Lilliputian Living World Building Compendium in the description as well. So this is what my finished watercolor Paperchild is going to look like. Here is the printable liner. You guys will be able to find a link to that down in the description below. It's free if you'd like to print it out and color along. You are free to color with whatever you want to use to color this, but I'm going to be using watercolors for today's tutorial. And this is a 2-part tutorial. In this part, I'm going to show you guys how to paint this illustration, and in the second part, I'm going to show you guys how to cut out, assemble, and pose your Paperchild. So I'm using Canson XL watercolor paper, inked with a Sakura Pigma FB brush pen, the Core mini palette, some blue painter's tape, some spare chipboard, a plastic daisy palette, and assorted watercolor brushes. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to secure my watercolor paper to my chipboard just to give it a little bit of extra stability. I'm not taping it on all 4 sides, just on the top and on the bottom. And if you guys have been watching the other Paperchild painting tutorials, then you have a pretty good idea of how I'm going to go about painting this. So rather than just focusing on just a straightforward watercolor tutorial, since the first 2 in this series already covered that pretty well, and I'm not going to be doing anything that unusual for this 3rd illustration, I'm going to talk to you guys about Christmas and how I have celebrated Christmas down here in Southeast Louisiana. So down here in Louisiana, we don't really get a lot of snow. It might snow once every 10 years, and if it does snow, it's only a couple of inches on the ground, and it usually doesn't stick. During my time here in Louisiana, because I did live in Nashville for 7 years where it snowed every year and I could get snowed in, and the street I lived on would ice and I'd get stuck in my apartment for 2 weeks. But when it does snow here in Louisiana, it's kind of a big deal because we just don't have the infrastructure to deal with snow. We don't have the salt trucks. We don't have ice scrapers. We don't have heated streets like some areas do. So basically when it snows, even if it's just a couple of inches, everything shuts down and it's kind of like a snow day. Now some people definitely do still have to go into work, but for example, schools usually close when it's snowing because the buses just can't get the kids to school safely. There's a lot of bridges here, and as you guys might know, bridges ice before roads. So in my childhood, it only snowed once when I was like 4, and then once again when I was in college about to graduate. So snow here in Louisiana is a pretty rare occurrence. So the idea of a white Christmas was always kind of like a fairy tale to me. I figured other people had it, but I couldn't really imagine what it would look like or what it would feel like, what that kind of day would be. Like I mentioned though, it does snow a lot in Nashville, but I never had my family up to visit me in Nashville, so I never got to experience a white Christmas with my family. And I've never actually stayed in Nashville over Christmas. I would always pack everything up and fly down to Louisiana for 2 weeks and work remotely in Louisiana so that I could spend Christmas with my family. So that doesn't mean we don't do other Christmas accoutrements. We don't do other Christmassy things down here in Southeast Louisiana. They're just a little disjointed. So if you're a fellow Louisianian, you're probably familiar with the Cajun Night Before Christmas. You have probably heard it so many times you could recite it by heart. If you're not from Louisiana and you're not familiar with the book, I do recommend you actually read it. But when I talk to other Louisianians my age, teachers and librarians down here when we were growing up acted like that was the only book about Christmas ever and the only book about Louisiana ever. So we all heard it a million times. And you know, while it's a charming tale, it isn't the only Christmas story out there. And not all of us are that Cajun. So actually, The Cajun Night Before Christmas was a big inspiration for 7-Inch Kara, my own comic, which is also set in Southeast Louisiana. It's set in Hahnville, right off of the Mississippi River, in the house that my mom grew up in. And I basically wanted to do a story set in Louisiana that wasn't like, whoo boy, Cajun, if you guys know what I mean. I wanted to kind of normalize life in Louisiana for people not in Louisiana, and also to create a recognizable version of Louisiana for people who do grow up in Louisiana, because The Cajun Night Before Christmas is not really that recognizable as life in Louisiana to most Louisianians. It is a very particular vision of a very particular time and a very particular place in Louisiana. It is not indicative of most Louisiana culture. It's not indicative of how we celebrate Christmas necessarily. It's just a reimagining of the night before Christmas with a very hubo slant. And that's great. Like, I'm not actually dunking on the book itself. I have a lot of fondness for the book. I've referenced the book several times. I just have a problem with there not being enough literature for readers of all ages set in Louisiana, considering how many Louisianians are born and die each year. I know we make books, I just don't know why they don't reach further distribution even within our own state. We do have a tendency to crab bucket one another, where if we see one succeeding, we yank them back and we're like, hey, you're from here, you don't get to succeed. No sir, who you think you are? And I'm not really a big fan of that either myself, but it's been done to me a lot down here. So, you know, of course I'm not going to support that. I'm going to try to crab bucket the crab bucket and be like, hey, hold on there. Who you are? Why are you holding him back? Let him succeed. You go back to what you're doing. Mind your own business, boy. Like that. So anyway, that's not really that much about Louisiana Christmas. That's just more about Louisiana stubborn mentality. And of course, not everyone down here is like that. There are areas where it is not like that at all. There are areas where it is way worse. So, you know, like any place in the country, your mileage may vary and your attitudes may vary. And it's really about what's considered acceptable rather than like how people are actually made. So, my Christmases as a kid were pretty straightforward. I had grandparents who'd moved from Hahnville to live in Picayune, Mississippi. So after going to church, usually Christmas Mass or the Christmas service, I used to be in the choir when we were Presbyterian. So we would do the choir performance and then get in the car and drive 2 hours to go to Picayune. And we would spend Christmas with my mom's side of the family. And I come from a fairly large family, and it was always really exciting for me to be able to see my cousins, because when I was young, those were my friends. And I just always really looked forward to getting to play with them and see them and hang out with them. And my grandparents lived kind of out in the country, which I loved. And they had these 3 big fir trees in front of their house. And it didn't happen every year, but it happened a couple of times where my grandfather decorated those 20-foot tall, 30-foot tall fir trees with lights and giant ornaments. And that was really special for me. I still remember that, and I think that was so cool that he did that. And then, being a little kid, the Christmas tree my grandparents had in their house always just seemed 12 feet tall, like the Christmas tree in the Nutcracker, where it just keeps growing towards the ceiling. Now, that doesn't mean my family didn't put up their own Christmas tree, but most of our Christmas activities were spent in Mississippi. And as a kid, us kids would go sleep downstairs in the den all together so we could stay up all night and kind of get into trouble. And my grandparents had a couple of fireplaces. They were really chained to the same chimney, but there was one on the lowest level and then one on the level, one up from that. And it was always really exciting because they'd only really light the fire on Christmas. So it'd be exciting to drink hot cocoa and sit around the fire and wait to open presents or start playing around with the presents you've already gotten. And my grandmother had stockings for all of her grandkids and all of my aunts and uncles. And the stockings would just wrap all the way around the room. So I have really fond memories of that. Those are some of my favorite Christmas memories. Unfortunately, my grandfather died when I was 12, and my grandmother moved to Texas, and all that just kind of fell apart. So family Christmases with my immediate family weren't nearly as fun. Not just because I didn't get to see my family, but because there's only 4 of us, and my dad, who's passed away since, was a workaholic. And he did have a bit of a drinking problem as well. So Christmases for me, minus the extended family, were actually very sad and kind of anticlimactic. And for all of my teenage years, I actually didn't like Christmas. And I like the Christmas breaks because down here we'll get 2 weeks off for Christmas. And that's if a hurricane doesn't eat away all of our holiday days. So we'll get 2 weeks for Christmas. So I like that time off. But I would usually try to find as many activities as I could with my friends outside the house as possible. So ice skating here, you have to go to a special rink for that, and there's only 1 or 2, and they're not always open. You can't just go ice skating like on a pond because it doesn't get that cold, and most people down here don't know how to ice skate. A lot of us know how to rollerblade, but we don't know how to ice skate. And you don't go out and chop down your own Christmas tree. A lot of like the kind of traditional Christmas activities aren't really activities we do so much down here. Now, there are the Lutcher bonfires on the levee, and I've always wanted to go see those. Those are one of like the big deal Christmas things here. And then Covington, Louisiana also has a Christmas market that I'd like to check out. They're doing it this year, but with COVID, I don't think that, actually it's tomorrow, I don't think that's such a safe or good idea. So I probably won't be doing it this year, although I'm definitely interested in selling some of my art and 7-inch Cara at the Christmas market in the future. So how do you guys celebrate Christmas where you live? Does it snow where you live? When I lived in Nashville and it snowed, the kids would get out the sleds, and some of them would even like skate on the road, which is dangerous. But here, not so much. Days can be up to 70 in December, so you'll see adults and kids out cutting the lawn, chasing the dog, playing in the yard, riding their Christmas bikes in shorts in December, and that's just how it is. I imagine it's not too dissimilar in the other Gulf Coast states, and it's probably very similar in Florida too. So it makes celebrating Christmas, which is always shown as such a wintry holiday, and it has such cold connotations, and there's connotations of snow and white and blizzardness, and we don't get any of those things. So living in a state which was more of a white Christmas kind of state, where they actually did do some decorating, was kind of a nice change. So something else that my family used to do was we would go do something called Christmas in the Oaks. It's held at City Park, and it's basically held in this small city park amusement park. And they would decorate it with lights and Christmas themes, and every school would in the Orleans parishes would decorate their own Christmas tree, and those would be displayed. And there'd be choir performances. In fact, the high school choir I was in used to do performances there. And you could take a train ride, it's a little toy train, a train ride around the park to admire the lights. And I always really enjoyed Christmas in the Oaks. I never got to do it with Joseph, but I used to do it every year from early high school until my senior year of college. So that's something that once COVID is Oh, more behind us, more solved. I don't even know what to say about that. It's safer to go out. That's something that I'd really like to go out and do. I have a lot of fondness for that. They have this giant, beautiful carousel. It's a historic carousel that they've been renovating over the years to try and maintain it. And I just think that would be a lot of fun. All right, so in the second part of this tutorial, I'll show you guys how to cut this out and assemble it and perch it in your tree. I hope you guys didn't mind hearing about some of my Christmas experiences. Feel free to share some of yours down in the comments below. I would love to learn some new or different traditions, some traditions that differ from mine. Louisiana having such a French colonial heritage, we tend to have a lot of culturally Catholic Christmas traditions, so I'm curious to see how people in other areas of the country and in other places in the world celebrate Christmas. What are some of your holiday traditions? Let me know. And keep an eye out for part 2 of this tutorial. You can also check the description down below for a list of all the materials that we used, as well as links to some of the other Paperchild tutorials. So have a wonderful day, guys. Bye!